I remember the exact moment I became invisible to my own children. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no accusations hurled across a dinner table. It happened quietly, the way the worst things always do. And I was sitting on the back porch of the house I built with my own 2 hands, drinking my morning coffee, watching the sun come up over the cornfield. I had worked that land for 31 years. I knew every acre of it. I knew where the drainage ran slow after heavy rain. I knew which section of fence the deer pushed through every October. I knew the smell of the soil in spring when it finally thawed and turned dark and rich and ready. That land was me, and I was it. My name is Dale. I'm 67 years old. I spent my whole adult life farming outside of Decatur, Illinois. End quote. When my wife, Margaret, passed away 8 years ago, I kept the farm running alone. People told me I couldn't do it. 18, then 5. They said a man my age, by himself, with 300 acres of soybeans and corn, it was too much. They were wrong. I did it. I did it. I got up before sunrise every single day, and I did it because the land needed me and because working kept the grief from swallowing me whole. My children, my son Ryan, my daughter Becca, and my youngest, Cody, they grew up on this farm. They learned to drive tractors before they learned to drive cars. They ate food that came out of that soil. This farm paid for their schooling, their weddings, their first houses. Ryan's got a place over in Springfield now. Works in insurance. Becca married a man named Greg, who sells medical equipment, and they live in a suburb outside of Indianapolis. Cody, my youngest, he's always been a little lost, bouncing around from job to job, but he landed in Nashville a few years back doing something with music production. All 3 of them turned out fine. Better than fine. I was proud of every one of them. Amen. What I wasn't prepared for was the Tuesday in September when all 3 of them showed up at the farm at the same time without calling first. I was coming in from checking on the east field when I saw the cars in the driveway. Ryan's gray Tahoe, Becca's white minivan, Cody's beat-up Camry, with the Tennessee plates. The Tahoe Pajes. I felt a small flicker of joy. I thought maybe they'd planned a surprise. Maybe one of them had some good news, a promotion, a pregnancy, something worth celebrating. I pulled off my boots at the mudroom door and walked into the kitchen, and there they all were, sitting around the table I'd eaten at my whole life. The one Margaret had refinished the summer before she got sick. They weren't smiling. Ryan had a yellow legal pad in front of him. Becca was holding a manila folder. Cody was staring at his hands. "Dad," Ryan said, "sit down. We need to talk about the farm." I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, my chair, the one with the slightly shorter leg I'd shimmed up years ago, and I sat. "What about it?" I said. Ryan cleared his throat. He's always been the one who takes charge, the way a firstborn does when he decides the mantle is his to carry. We've been talking, the 3 of us, for a while now, about the future, about what makes sense. What makes sense for who? I asked. Becca opened the manila folder. Inside were papers, printed documents, what looked like financial summaries, maybe some kind of assessment. "Dad, the farm hasn't turned a real profit in 2 years. We've looked at the numbers." "I know the numbers," I said. "It was a bad stretch. Weather was—" "It's not just the weather," Ryan said. He said it the way you talk to someone who doesn't understand something, slow and careful, like I was the one who needed things explained to him. "The operating costs are up. Equipment is aging. You're doing the work of 3 men by yourself. Dad, you're 67. End quote. I'm aware of how old I am. Cody still hadn't looked up. "We think," Becca said carefully, "that the responsible thing, the smart thing, would be to sell." The word sat there on Margaret's table like something dead. "Sell," I repeated. "The land alone is worth close to $2 million in today's market," Ryan said. He flipped to a page on his legal pad. "We've already spoken to a realtor. A developer out of Champaign has expressed interest. They want to build a residential community. The offer." 2. "You spoke to a realtor," I said slowly, "about my land." Ryan had the decency to pause. "We're trying to look out for you, Dad." "And where exactly do I go," I asked, "when you sell my land and put up houses on it?" Becca reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her voice went soft the way it does when she's already decided something and wants me to feel like I had a choice. There are some really wonderful communities, Dad. Active senior communities. They have golf, swimming, group activities. You wouldn't be isolated out here by yourself anymore. I looked at her hand on top of mine. I looked at Ryan's legal pad. I looked at Cody, who finally looked up, and what I saw in his face wasn't cruelty, it was guilt, which in some ways is worse, because guilt means a person already knows they're doing something wrong and they're doing it anyway. So you've decided, I said. We haven't decided anything, Ryan said. We want your input, but Dad, we took a vote, among ourselves, and we all agree this is the right move. And there it was. A vote. My children, 3 people who came into the world on this land, who I rocked to sleep and bandaged up and coached through heartbreak and drove to prom. They had taken a vote about my life, about my home, about whether I was capable of deciding my own future. I want to tell you, friends, that I stood up and told them to get off my property. I want to tell you I threw the legal pad across the kitchen and said something my daddy would have been proud of. But I didn't. I sat very still and I looked at each of their faces, one by one, and I said nothing, because, in that moment, I understood something, but arguing would not change what they had already decided. The vote wasn't really a question. It was a notification. I need some air, I said, and I walked back outside. I stood in the yard for a long time. The sun was getting low. The field to the east was gold and green, the soybeans almost ready. 31 years of sunrises. Almost ready. Margaret's garden still grew along the south side of the house, a little wild now, but still blooming every spring like she'd never left. I looked at all of it and I made my own decision. I was not going to fight them, but I was not going to make it easy, either. I went back inside. They were still at the table, talking quietly among themselves, the way people do when they think the hard part is over. I sat down. I'll need 30 days, I said. Ryan looked up, surprised. 30 days for what? To get my affairs in order, I said. If I'm leaving right. 30 days. They exchanged glances. Becca nodded first. Ryan agreed. Even Cody, who had barely said 10 words the entire visit, said, "That's fair, Dad." Fair. I let that word go. I had stopped expecting fair. What happened over the next 30 days, not one of them saw coming. The first thing I did was call my attorney, a man named Howard Briggs, who I'd worked with for 20 years and who had handled Margaret's estate. And Howard is sharp, thorough, and not easily surprised. When I told him what I wanted to do, he was quiet for a moment on the phone, then said, "Dale, you're sure about this?" I told him I was. He said, "All right, come in Thursday and we'll draw it up." The second thing I did was call my neighbor, Frank Delacroix. Frank farms the land adjacent to mine, about 200 acres of it, and his family has been out here almost as long as mine has. Frank is 72, never married, tough as the oak trees that line the creek between our properties. Over the years, we've lent each other equipment, shared harvests during bad seasons, driven each other to the hospital more than once. He's the closest thing I've had to a brother since my own brother passed. "Frank," I said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to think about it seriously." He thought about it seriously. He called me back the next morning and said yes. I spent those 30 days finishing the fall work. I got the soybeans in. I serviced the equipment. I made a list of everything on the property and what it was worth. I walked every acre of that land one more time, slowly, the way you walk through a house before you leave it for good, taking mental photographs of everything you don't want to forget. And on the 30th day, my children came back. Ryan flew in from Springfield. Becca and Greg drove from Indianapolis. Cody came up from Nashville. They arrived together this time, almost ceremonially, like they expected a signing. We sat at the kitchen table again. Howard Briggs was there too, which I could see made Ryan uncomfortable. Ryan likes to be the most prepared person in the room, and a lawyer tends to upset that balance. I put a folder on the table. "I've made my decision," I said. Ryan reached for the folder. I put my hand on top of it. "But, let me talk first," I said. "Then you can look." And I talked. I told them about the first winter after their mother died, when I wasn't sure I could get out of bed, but the cattle needed feeding, so I got up. I told them about the year the equipment broke down right at harvest, and I worked 20-hour days for 2 weeks to get it done by hand so there would be money for Becca's wedding that spring. I told them about the summer I drove 6 hours round trip every week to sit with Cody in a rehab facility, not once, but 4 times, because I never stopped believing he was worth fighting for. I told them I never once called a meeting. I never once took a vote. I never once made them feel like they needed to earn their seat at my table. Becca was crying before I finished. Cody too. Ryan sat rigid, jaw tight, the way he gets when he knows he's in the wrong but hasn't decided to admit it yet. "Now," I said, "you can open it." Ryan opened the folder. The first page was a land transfer deed. I had signed over 30 acres, the plot along the East Creek, the prettiest piece of land on the property, to Frank Delacroix, for $1, as a gift between neighbors. The next page was a trust document establishing the remaining 270 acres as a conservation land trust. It could never be sold for development. It could never be subdivided. It would remain farmland in perpetuity, managed by a local agricultural preservation foundation, with Frank named as the working steward for as long as he was able. The farmhouse and the 2 acres around it would pass, upon my death, to whichever of my children chose to live in it and actually work the land. Not sell it. Live in it. Says, pass. Ryan looked up. "Dad, this means the developer gets nothing," I said. "Correct. You've tied up the asset. You can't. I know what I've done. But the money was never yours," I said quietly. "And it was never the point." The room was very still. "Where are you going to live?" Becca asked. Her voice was small. "With Frank, for now. He's got the old foreman's house on his property. I'll work his land through the winter. Come spring, I'm going to move out to eastern Colorado. My cousin Harriet has a place there. She's been asking me to come for years. Fresh start." "Dad?" Ryan put the papers down. For the first time all morning, he looked less like a man running a meeting and more like my son. "Dad, we didn't mean." "I know you didn't mean to be cruel," I said. "That's the part that took me the longest to understand. You thought you were helping. You thought I was losing and you were saving me. But nobody asked me whether I wanted to be saved. And the way you did it, a vote, Ryan, like I was a line item in a budget, that's something I'm going to have to carry for a while." I stood up. Howard gathered his copies. I shook his hand, and he left. I looked at my children one more time. "The door is not closed," I said. "But the farm is no longer negotiable." I moved into Frank's foreman's house that week. It was small, 2 rooms, a wood stove, a narrow porch looking out over his cornfield. It smelled like cedar and old coffee. I slept better there the first night than I had in months. I want to be honest with you, friends, because you deserve the truth. Those first weeks were hard. Not the work was fine. I had always known how to work, but the silence in the evenings, the absence of even the idea that my family was close by, that if I needed them they were there. Loneliness has a specific weight to it. It sits in the chest like a stone. I won't pretend otherwise. But something else happened in that silence. I started to remember who I was before I became somebody's father. Somebody's problem. Somebody's line item. And I started waking up in the morning without dread. I started eating real meals again. Frank and I would sit on his porch after dinner and talk about nothing, equipment, weather, old stories, the way 2 people do when they're not performing anything for each other. It was the most honest company I'd had in years. I stayed through the winter. Come March, I drove to Colorado. Harriet's place was a small ranch at the base of the Wet Mountains, south of Pueblo. She ran a few horses, kept a kitchen garden, rented out a guest cabin to hikers in the summer. She was 70 herself and sharp as a tack, and she didn't treat me like I needed managing. She treated me like a man who'd shown up and needed a cup of coffee and a reason to get to work. I found both. I helped Harriet fix up the guest cabin that spring. I repaired fencing, cleared brush, helped her get the garden in. I wasn't being paid. I didn't need to be paid. I needed to be useful, and being useful turned out to be enough. I didn't call my children. I had left Frank as the only person who knew exactly where I was. The children had Harriet's general area. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't punishing them with mystery, but I didn't reach out and they didn't come. I think they were ashamed, and shame can make people very still. 2 summers passed like that. Long, quiet, honest summers. Then one afternoon in August, I was replacing boards on the cabin porch when I heard a car come slowly up the gravel drive. I didn't look up right away. Hikers came through sometimes, but the car sat there longer than a hiker would, and then a door opened, and then I heard footsteps on the gravel, and then a voice. Dad. It was Cody. I looked up. He was standing about 20 feet away, in the same beat-up jeans he always wore. Thinner than I remembered, older in the face. But with that expression he's had since he was about 9 years old, the one that means he's about to tell me something he's been holding in for too long. I set down my hammer. I straightened up. How'd you find me? I asked. Frank, he said. I drove to Decatur first. Went to the farm. He paused. There are houses on the east side now. New development. I didn't know that was going to happen. The east side was Frank's land, I said. Not mine. His to do with as he chose. End quote. Cody nodded slowly. He took a few steps closer. Dad, is it okay if I sit down somewhere and talk to you? We sat on the porch I was repairing, in 2 old chairs. Harriet kept out there. Cody talked for a long time. He told me that after I left, the 3 of them had tried to proceed with the sale, only to discover what I had done with the trust, and the legal fight to undo it would cost more than the sale was worth. The developer had walked away. The farm sat empty for a season before Frank took over full management under the trust agreement. Ryan had been furious at me, at Howard Briggs, at the whole situation, but even his anger had eventually exhausted itself. Becca, Cody said, had barely spoken about it at all, which was its own kind of answer. And what about you? I asked. Cody looked out at the mountains. I've been thinking about it every day, he said. About that meeting. The vote. He shook his head. Dad, I didn't want to do that. I want you to know that. I was the last one to agree. Ryan had been working on me for 2 months. He had all these spreadsheets, all these projections. He made it sound logical. And I was scared. Scared you were going to run the farm into the ground, and there'd be nothing left, and you'd have nothing in your old age. But that wasn't my call to make. I know that now. It should never have been a vote. I listened to all of it. Then I said, what made you come? He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to me. Inside was a letter from Ryan. 4 pages. Handwritten. Ryan, who types everything, who I don't think has written by hand since high school. I read every word. It wasn't a perfect letter. He still explained himself more than he apologized. Ryan? That's Ryan. But underneath the explaining there was something real, a man who had realized he'd been efficient when he needed to be kind and who didn't entirely know how to say so. Becca had signed the bottom of the last page. Just her name. And underneath it, I'm sorry. Dad. I love you. Cody had written a single line on a sticky note attached to the envelope. It said, I should have stood up at that table. I didn't. I'm sorry. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Why didn't Ryan come himself? I asked. Cody almost smiled. He wanted to. I told him I should come first. He's still, you know how he is. He's working up to it. I did know how he was. I'd known how he was for 42 years. We sat there for a while without talking. A hawk was working the thermals above the ridge. The afternoon light was coming in low and gold the way it does in Colorado in late summer. The kind of light that makes everything look a little more permanent than it is. I'm not coming back to Illinois, I said. I know, Cody said. I'm not undoing the trust. I know that too. But I'm not closing the door either, I said. I told you all that when I left and I meant it. You want a relationship with me, it's going to be on honest ground this time. It's going to be on honest ground this time. No managing, no voting, no meetings where it's already been decided before I sit down. You come to me as my kids, not as a committee. Cody nodded. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it, which I have always respected about him, even when everything else was going sideways. My youngest boy was never ashamed of feeling things. And, okay, he said. Okay, I said. He stayed 3 days. He helped me finish the cabin porch. He wasn't much of a carpenter, but he was willing, and willing goes a long way. In the evenings he and Harriet and I ate together and talked about everything except the thing that had brought him there, which was exactly right. Some reconciliations don't need to be discussed to death. Sometimes you just show up and do the work and let that be the apology. Ryan came 6 weeks later. He drove himself, no spreadsheets, no legal pad. He stood in Harriet's driveway in a fleece jacket looking more like my kid than he had in 20 years. We walked the property together and he talked and I listened and then I talked and he listened and before he left he hugged me in the driveway for a long time without saying anything. That was more than enough. Becca came at Thanksgiving. She brought Greg and the grandkids, my granddaughter Nora, who is 14, and her twin brothers, Sam and Leo, who are 9 and apparently have endless energy for chasing Harriet's horses around the paddock. Becca cried when she saw me and then she went directly to Harriet's kitchen and started cooking, which is her way of loving people. We had Thanksgiving around Harriet's long table with the mountains out the window and nobody took a vote on anything. I want to be clear about something, friends, because I think it matters. I did not forgive my children to make myself feel righteous. I did not forgive them to prove a point. I forgave them because holding that kind of weight, the specific weight of deciding that the people you love are your enemies, is a slow poison, and I had already spent enough of my life close to grief. Forgiveness wasn't them getting away with something. It was me putting it down. But I did not forget the lesson of that Tuesday in September, and I don't intend to. The lesson is this: there is a difference between people who love you and people who think they know what's best for you. Sometimes those two things live in the same person. In my children they do, but you have to be careful, friends, because that second thing, that certainty about what's best for you, can crowd out the first thing without either of you noticing until someone's sitting at their own kitchen table feeling like a problem to be solved. I am 67 years old. I get up before sunrise. I have calluses on my hands and ache in my knees, and I know which direction the wind comes from before I even look at the sky. I still know what I'm worth, and I will not have it put to a vote. I'm sitting on Harriet's porch as I tell you this. The wet mountains are turning pink at the top the way they do at dusk. Harriet is inside, and I can hear her radio through the screen door, an old country station she's had on since I can remember. In a few weeks, Ryan is driving out with his wife for Christmas. Cody's flying in from Nashville. Becca and the grandkids are coming the day after. It'll be crowded and loud, and somebody will definitely argue about something, and Nora will roll her eyes at everything the way 14-year-olds do, and Sam and Leo will probably break something. I cannot wait. Not because everything is perfect. It isn't. There are still things unsaid between me and Ryan, and there probably always will be. There are mornings I sit with my coffee and think about Margaret's garden growing wild without her, about the sound of the combine in the east field at dusk, about the particular way the farmhouse creaked in the wind, and I feel a loss so old and specific it has its own name inside me. But loss and life are not opposites. They are the same road, and you walk it or you don't, and I have always chosen to walk it. My children took a vote on my future, and so I voted too. I voted with every choice I made in the 30 days that followed, with every legal document I signed, with every mile I put between myself and the people who thought my value could be calculated on a spreadsheet. I voted for myself, and I won. They can tell you, friends, every one of them will tell you that the man who drove away that October was someone they recognized. And the man standing in Harriet's driveway when they came looking was someone new, quieter, straighter, less concerned with being agreed with and more concerned with being true. That is what leaving cost me. And that is what leaving gave me, and I would do it again without a second thought.